Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your leave, I rise to make my contribution to this Honourable House on the bill shortly entitled the Appropriations Bill 2018-2017. Mr. Speaker, over the past days, we have heard a robust debate on the economy, growth rates, GDP, and of the work done and being pursued by various ministries. Mr. Speaker, we heard much about the numbers that make up the budget for 2018. And I wouldn't want to go through much of the numbers because I am aware that the numbers represent and reflect a bigger picture. But enough just to say that in terms of the numbers, the one thing I never heard anyone mention was the fact that our debt to GDP ratio, as compared to the rest of the ECCU, is well below average. The ECCB has prescribed a 60% debt to GDP ratio. The average for the ECCU, 71%. St. Kitts at 63%, with all signs showing us to go well under that 60% mark, which tells me, Mr. Speaker, that what we see here in St. Kitts and Nevis is good fiscal responsibility that would allow us to be able to meet all of our obligations and continue to have an economy that would grow due to this, Mr. Speaker.
It has nothing to do with that debt.
Mr. Speaker, we have not focused on the fact that the numbers are a representation of the plans, programs, and policies that the government, through the various ministries, will accomplish in the upcoming year, Mr. Speaker. And it is within this context that I wish to add to the debate on the bill shortly entitled the Appropriation Bill 2018-2017. Mr. Speaker, the theme under which the budget has been focused for 2018 is putting people first in the pursuit of sustainable development. Mr. Speaker, there is no talk of sustainable development in today's environment without us focusing on and talking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. Speaker, development goals that St. Kitts and Nevis well on its way to achieving, Mr. Speaker, along with other UN member states. It was in 2015, September 25th to be exact, 2015, that this commitment to these goals was established with the idea of being able to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all as part of a new sustainable development agenda. Yes. Mr. Speaker, as I peruse the estimates for 2018, there was indeed that consistent theme throughout the various ministries of ending poverty, protecting the planet, and ensuring prosperity for all, which tells me, Mr. Speaker, that in preparing for the 2018 objectives of the government, that this government considered its international commitments it made in the adoption of the SDGs and have designed plans, programs, and policies throughout various ministries that will place St. Kitts and Nevis well on its way to meeting these goals by the 2030 target. Mr. Speaker, this cannot and should not be taken lightly, as this focus on meeting our international commitments would not only show and prove a government that follows through on commitments, but further examination of the SDGs and its people-focused sustainable goals also reflects the government's commitment to prosperity for all. By aligning the various ministries, plans, and programs for 2018 so closely to the Sustainable Development Goals would prove beneficial to the entire federation and is money well placed for 2018, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we proceed, I would like to begin by focusing on 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals and showing how the Ministry of Community Development, Gender Affairs and Social Services plans for 2018 would allow St. Kitts and Nevis to effectively meet goal number 1, no poverty. Goal number 2, zero hunger. Goal number 5, gender equality. Goal number 10, reduced inequalities. And goal number 17, partnership for goals. Mr. Speaker, according to the estimates, in 2018, we shall see the Ministry of Community Development et al. Continue to pursue its efforts in developing a national housing registry, which would allow the ministry to be better able to develop a proxy means test to determine persons' eligibility for public assistance.
Just reading your reading.
Such a test, Mr. Speaker, would ensure that St. Kitts and Nevis would be able to make better assessment of the truly vulnerable amongst us, those who are most deserving of the inclusion in our social safety net programs. Mr. Speaker, being better able to identify these individuals for inclusion in our safety net programs means that we would be providing those who are most in need of a hand up the opportunity to take themselves out of poverty, Mr. Speaker. This will in effect assist us on our commitment and be able to realize the SDG goals number 1 of no poverty, and by extension goal number 2 of zero hunger, and thereby improving the general standard of living for our people. Mr. Speaker, this registry would not only be used to determine eligibility. This National Housing Registry will also provide further functionality by assisting the government with one of its own commitments of conducting a new country poverty assessment. This assessment, Mr. Speaker, will provide a comprehensive picture of the living conditions of all of our people. It will be able to show the extent and levels of poverty within varying communities and other vulnerabilities that exist because of poverty. Having this valuable statistical data of living condition would then provide the Ministry of Community Development with a basis by which it would be able to develop more targeted social programs that would meaningfully impact the lives of those who need the most assistance, those most vulnerable amongst us. Mr. Speaker, this is clearly an example of this government to the Ministry of Community Development et al. Putting people first. Mr. Speaker, the efforts of the ministry to continue its quest to raise the standard of living of all the people of St. Kitts and Nevis is also seen in its other programs and policies that are being renewed and are implemented in 2018. I speak of such programs as the replacing of the paper-based food stamps, vouchers, Mr. Speaker, to a more efficient debit card system, where persons would be able to have money deposited directly to these cards instead of having to go to the ministry to retrieve the paper vouchers. In essence, also, you can see it as a way of these individuals knowing the stigma associated with these paper-based vouchers. We will now be able to see more persons who will be able to reach out to and gain the assistance of the ministry, and thereby helping them alleviate their problems or issues with poverty or the like, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 2018, the estimates also provide for the establishment of the ministry's satellite offices. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to reach the people where they are, in their communities, in the environs in which they are most comfortable, Mr. Speaker. And there's no better way of putting people first than putting people-centered service as the utmost important than going into the environments and into the communities where they are most comfortable. This would only prove to be a positive initiative, as now persons who may have needed assistance but were unable to do so, based on the simple fact of not having the means of getting to the ministry, will now be able to have that access to the ministry closer to home through these satellite offices, putting people first, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are also seeing real impact on improvement to lives of the most vulnerable, as the estimates speak to the ministry's plan to expand social assistance program to include educational support, financial assistance for extracurricular activities for children, which I very much support, because there are many children out there who can benefit from extracurricular activities such as performing arts or sports, but because their parents can't afford to send them to these extracurricular activities, they are left out and feel left behind. But now the government is saying, we'll give you that assistance. We'll allow these children to be able to participate and continue to develop themselves, both academically and in other areas. And for that, Mr. Speaker, we must applaud the government. These efforts will see improved standard of living for our most vulnerable and may even go further in making families more self-reliant, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's no way our country can effectively achieve sustainability if we do not put in place the proper policies and plans that would allow us to attain the sustainability we desire. Some of the policies being pursued by the ministry, which I believe would assist in attaining our sustainability goals, are the Social Protection Bill, which is expected to be brought to Parliament in 2018. This bill, using the statistical data that would be retrieved from or gained through the National Housing Registry, which I spoke of earlier, would allow for sharing of this information between governmental organizations. So all the departments and ministries that affect or have some direct contribution towards the social development of our people will be able to get this information, thereby allowing them to be able to target those most vulnerable within our societies. And I say, Mr. Speaker, effort well placed. Mr. Speaker, we are also seeing the implementation of a national special needs policy, which would see St. Kitts and Nevis well on its way in meeting yet another sustainable development goal, that being goal number 10, which is reduced inequalities. Mr. Speaker, this policy would seek to ensure the rights of persons living with disabilities is protected. Through this policy, the ministry will be better able to advocate for the social, political, cultural, and economic inclusiveness of the vulnerable group, a quest that this group have been known to be on for years and is now coming to fruition, and which I am sure is a welcome achievement for them. Yes. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Community Development, Gender Affairs and Social Services continue to lead from the front on our Federation's efforts of attaining the Sustainable Development Goals of no poverty, zero hunger, gender equality, and reduced inequalities. Its people-centered approach for 2018, and I say it again, its people-centered approach for 2018, as outlined in the estimate, would ensure that St. Kitts and Nevis will be well on our way of achieving these goals. But as always, I'd have to advocate, it is also important for us as citizens, and I think the Honourable Hamilton would have pointed that out, that it is also important for us to do our part in ensuring that these goals are indeed met. We can do so by assisting in identifying those among us. We live in the communities. We know who are most vulnerable. We need to be able to identify these individuals and point those individuals out to the appropriate authority so that the assistance can be provided to them. We can also assist the department by volunteering our time and effort to the ministry in their mentorship, boys mentorship program, as well as Project Viola. So there are parts that we as citizens can play in ensuring that these goals are met. Mr. Speaker, there are also other ministries that support the efforts of attaining our commitments to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Another such ministry is the Ministry of Education, which has outlined for 2018 plans and programs that would allow for the attaining of Sustainable Development Goal number 4, quality education. Mr. Speaker, the introduction of proper policies and strategies stands as a base upon which any government can effectively pursue a mandate of developing an economy of growth. And what better way of ensuring that that growth is realized than through the creation of better quality education for all citizens. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Education in the estimates for 2018 have outlined its medium-term plans on achieving quality of education. Some of the plans include ensuring that all students, regardless of income level, from early childhood straight through to tertiary levels, have access to and can participate in quality education. The ministry is committing to do all in its power, to ensure that it does its part of providing whatever assistance necessary to see that all children and young persons can access and participate in our education system. Allow me to highlight here, Mr. Speaker, that how the work of this ministry, coupled with that of the Ministry of Community Development et al., can work in tandem to see that those most vulnerable can indeed receive the assistance required to access quality education. Let us be reminded of the Social Protection Bill, which will be tabled in Parliament next year, and its intention of statistical data sharing, which would then allow the Ministry of Education to be able to have the data that they need to identify persons who would benefit from having access or whatever assistance they need in order to ensure that they have the quality education that they require. Mr. Speaker, we also see in the estimates that the ministry is committed to the drafting of a new curriculum framework in 2018. Mr. Speaker, I am so pleased to see that the ministry is pursuing this new framework, as we all can agree that it is time now for us to truly relook our curriculum. The world continues to move at a fast pace, Mr. Speaker, and it is going in new directions, and it is important that our education system is aligned with the new direction in which this country is, within the world is heading, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we have to ensure that whatever curriculum, whatever framework we create is properly aligned with what the world is headed to. And on this note, Mr. Speaker, I would like to implore the member with responsibility for education to ensure that STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, be one of the main areas of focus within this new curriculum framework, as technology, science, engineering, and math have now become a basic staple of any developing and developed country. And our people must be provided with the skills in these areas that would allow them to actively contribute and participate in any economy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to suggest that keen attention should be placed on our visual and performing arts, as this area have seen much excitement among our young people. The visual and performing arts are just as lucrative and honest means of personal development and growth as any other field, and its thrust for creative expression would only prove to be beneficial to our society as a whole. And so I also implore you, sir, Mr. Member, with responsibility, to place visual and performing arts as part of the core of the new curriculum framework. I am aware that we now have the performing arts as a CSEC subject, which many of our schools now participate in. From I know Bastia High School started, and we've been adding over the years. However, I am also speaking to introducing this at the primary school levels, so that we do have this throughout our school system. One of the biggest thrusts towards achieving sustainable development, number 4, by the Ministry of Education is through the official launch of the ministry's education sector plan. This plan, according to the 2018 estimates, will seek to provide holistic, lifelong education for all. So, Mr. Hamilton, I suppose I'm able to add what what the Honourable Member for 5 couldn't in his short space of time he had left to speak with his ministry. Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that this government continues to pursue plans and policies that would indeed create a strong base upon which our country would see continued growth. The establishment and implementation of this education sector plan can only prove to be beneficial in setting the ministry on a path to providing a level of education for our people that would indeed allow the Federation to accomplish the goal of quality education. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn my attention to and look at what our government is doing in order to achieve Sustainable Development Goal number 3, good health and well-being, by taking a closer look at the 2018 plans of the Ministry of Health. In order for our government to make good on meeting its mandate of sustainability and prosperity for all, it is important that meaningful investment is made in the health of the nation. Yeah. From perusal of the 2018 estimates, it is noted that the Ministry of Health is indeed ensuring that adequate investment is made within the ministry so that the people of our country would have access to high-end care in times of illness. High-end care, Mr. Speaker. We have been hearing for some time now of the negative impact and challenges being experienced through non-communicable diseases on a growing number of persons within our society. This disease, if not given the attention needed, would continue to prove to have severe impact on our national productivity, performance, and the competitiveness of our local workforce. It is therefore encouraging, Mr. Speaker, to see that in 2018, the Ministry of Health will continue to pursue all efforts in curtailing this threat to our socio-economic development. The ministry would do so through its increased budgetary allocation to primary health care within our communities. Again, we have seen the government focusing in the communities and centering on the people, going to them where they are. The ministry will ensure that adequate care gets to the people where they are in their communities. We will see the build-out of in-service training of community-based healthcare workers, taking them out of the institution-based setting and placing them in the communities where care and attention are needed most in our fight to decrease the cases of NCDs within our society. Mr. Speaker, it is a clear case of putting people first in pursuit of sustainable development. Mr. Speaker, the ministry, on its quest to attaining the Sustainable Development Goal number 3, will seek to implement its National Strategic Plan, a plan which it expects would be followed up to 2021. Most notable amongst its objectives is the focus on some key areas which I believe are areas that tend to be most vulnerable, and once given the due care and attention necessary, which this action plan seeks to do, would only ensure that our goal of good health and well-being is met. Mr. Speaker, these areas include family health. We are all well aware of the immunization program offered by the government to the Ministry of Health. The program, in existence for years, will now be enhanced with the implementation of the electronic immunization registry. This registry, once fully implemented, would allow the ministry This registry, once fully implemented, would allow the ministry to keep better immunization records, which would only prove beneficial to our families, our societies, our communities, as we will be better able to monitor and be kept up to date on the required immunizations required for our families, our family members. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Health is also taking a closer look at mental health. We are fully aware of the mental health clinic, which was open to the public this year. A well-needed addition, as mental health, although tabooed, is a health issue that affects many families and communities. In 2018, we will see the strengthening of mental health service delivery with the recruitment of an additional psychiatrist, modernization of the legal instruments on mental health, and the improvement of mental health surveillance. The government is truly doing its part in ensuring that all the needs of all the people can be met. Mr. Speaker, they also will be focused on human resource. The health system would not work at optimum and meet its goals and objectives without a strong and adequate workforce. That is why it is welcoming to see the ministry's intention of developing a human resource for health policy and action plan by the end of 2018. Mr. Speaker, this is a consistent theme throughout the 2018 estimates. Ministry by ministry, we see the establishment and implementation of better planning tools through the establishment of policies and action plans. This tells me that the government is indeed committed to its resolve of attaining the Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. Speaker, this strategic plan goes further by highlighting the ministry's targeted strategic objectives. Objectives which, once achieved, would indeed see our country move towards good health and well-being. Some of the notable targeted objectives include reducing mortality from chronic non-communicable diseases by 10%, a reduction in infant mortality rate from 25.3 to 12 per 1,000 live births. Mr. Speaker, real and tangible objectives, once achieved, would more than improve the healthcare service provided to the citizens of this country. Mr. Speaker, this is commitment in action as the Ministry of Health continues to pursue programs and policies that meet the needs of all the citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis, while at the same time meeting its international commitment of attaining SDG number 3 of good health and well-being. Mr. Speaker, there are other sustainable development goals that are being met by this government through other ministries. For example, within the Ministry of Agriculture, Human Settlement, Cooperative and Environment, and as outlined by the Honourable Member earlier, we see where the Department of Environment is doing its part in attaining goal number 13, climate action, through the development of strategies that would allow us to adapt to the impact of global warming while allowing us to do our part in reducing carbon dioxide emissions. One such effort by the Ministry of reducing carbon dioxide emissions is through the introduction of solar-powered school buses, which he spoke to earlier, which are expected by the end of 2018. Mr. Speaker, this mandate being pursued by the government in its efforts to put people first in pursuit of sustainable development is evident in the 2018 estimates. The policies, plans, and programs being pursued in 2018 stand as a base for which we can expect this government, as well as all future governments, to be able to progressively move our federation forward. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would end by reiterating that the 2018 estimates, plans, and programs cannot and should not be taken lightly, as this focus on meeting our international commitments would not only show and prove a government that follows through on its commitments, but further examination of the Sustainable Development Goals and its people-focused sustainable goals also reflects the government's commitment to prosperity for all. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I wish this bill safe passage to this Honourable House. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.